If you keep on cooking ribs using the clock, you're missing the point. Temperature, not time, makes ribs tender. Today, I'm going to bust the 3-2-1 rib cooking method and show you a method that slashes cooking time without sacrificing the flavor. You'll learn why the membrane must go, how a 2-hour smoke builds that mahogany bark, and why wrapping with butter, brown sugar, and honey is the secret to juicy, not mushy ribs. Stay tuned and you'll walk away with a repeatable method that works every time. Ever wonder why some ribs have a stubborn, rubbery bite even after hours on the smoker? The answer lies in a thin, almost see-through layer on the bone side of the ribs, called the membrane. That skin creates a barrier that keeps any seasoning from reaching the meat, and many beginners skip this step because the membrane feels like a tough, slick film that won't come off easily. That shortcut creates two problems at once. First, the rub can't evenly adhere, and some spots stay dry while others stay wet, producing an uneven bark. Second, the trapped moisture cooks inside the meat instead of escaping, which turns the texture from tender to mush. In a smoker, that uneven surface also means that the heat can't caramelize the spices uniformly, leaving patches where the rub hasn't cooked properly. The membrane also acts like a shield against the Maillard reaction, the chemical process that gives that cooked meat its deep brown color and nutty flavor. For that reaction to happen, the surface must be dry enough for proteins and sugars to interact with one another. When the membrane holds onto the water, the surface stays glossy and the sugars can't caramelize. That keeps the ribs gray and the bark soft. Removing the membrane exposes the meat fibers, letting the heat dry the surface and start the browning process. And here's a quick way to get that membrane off. Grab a butter knife and slide it under the corner of the membrane, lift just enough to create a small flap, and then grab a dry paper towel and use a firm grip. Pull steadily in one motion, and the membrane should peel away in one piece as it tears. Repeat the lift on another corner and keep on pulling. For especially stubborn spots, score a shallow line with your knife first. Then use the towel to yank it clean. The impact on the final rib is huge. Without the membrane, the rub can penetrate every corner, every crevice. That bark becomes darker, richer, and crispier, while the interior stays juicy because the moisture evaporates evenly. The next phase, we'll focus on how to lock in moisture, build a perfect bark, and finish with a quick wrap that keeps the meat juicy. So stay with me as we move from seasoning to the smoking process. The method I'll share uses a 2-hour smoke, a brief wrap, and a final half hour to hit that perfect texture. What if the secret to a perfect rib bark isn't more time, but the right rub and seasoning process? I'm going to show you how a simple blend of salt, pepper, garlic, paprika, and onion powder creates the foundation. Then we'll add a second sweeter layer that gives the bark its rich color. By the end of this part, you'll see why the rub matters more than you think. Let's first mix the base rub in a small bowl. Use 1 part salt, 1 part black pepper, 1 part garlic powder, 1 part paprika, and a half part of onion powder. The salt draws moisture to the surface, while the pepper and the garlic give it a gentle heat that builds depth. The paprika adds a smoky flavor and color even before the smoker does. And the onion powder rounds out the savory profile. Once the dry mix is ready, you sprinkle it evenly over the ribs. Now comes a common mistake, letting the rub sit too long. Salt can act like a cure if it stays on the meat for more than 3 hours, and the ribs will taste too salty rather than balanced. To avoid that, pat the ribs dry with paper towels before you add the rub. After you sprinkle the dry rub, don't just shake it off, take a clean hand and press it firmly into the meat. I do this because in my head, I feel like the pressure forces the granules into the muscle fibers, so the flavor actually penetrates deeper. Now you're going to smooth out any large clumps and make sure to have a nice uniform layer. Give the seasoned ribs a short rest for about 1 hour at room temperature. During this time, the salt will dissolve and it'll start penetrating right into the meat, while the other ingredients continue to dry on the surface. When you finally place the ribs on the racks of the smoker, the bark will form quickly because the surface is already dry and flavored. The result is a crisp, caramelized crust that stays firm, while the meat underneath stays juicy and tender. Using the right rub ingredients and seasoning process gives you a uniform crust without any mushiness. Now that the rub is set and the ribs have rested, the next challenge is managing moisture during the smoke. Too much steam will soften the bark, while too little will dry the meat. In the upcoming part of this video, we'll look at spritzing, wrapping, and the 2-2-1 timing that locks in juice and finishes the ribs in just a few hours. Stay with me and you'll see how the temperature, not the clock, controls the final tenderness. By the way, if you're new to backyard barbecue and you want a little extra help with cooking times and temperatures, I've got a free guide that'll make things super easy for you. It covers everything from meat to veggies and it's perfect for getting started. All you gotta do is drop a 100 down in the comments below and I'll send it your way. Can you get fall to bone ribs in just 5 hours? The answer is yes, you can. The 2-2-1 method makes that happen. Now, traditional 3-2-1 method ribs sit on the smoker for 3 hours, then 2 hours being wrapped, and then 1 more hour uncovered. That's 6 hours. And that plan often leaves your meat either mushy or dry because it ignores the internal temperature. With the 2-2-1 method, we flip the focus to heat, not hours, and end up with consistent tenderness. Start by preheating your smoker or pellet grill to a steady 275 degrees Fahrenheit. Lay the ribs meat side up and close the lid. Let the heat and the smoking wood do their thing. During this 2-hour window, you want a thin bark forming but not cracking. Once that bark has set, you will spritz the ribs with apple juice to keep the surface moist. And you're going to want to do this every 45 minutes to 1 hour. The juice adds a subtle sweet note and stops the bark from turning tough and drying out. Because the spritz only coats the outer layer of the meat, the underneath meat still dries enough for that Maillard reaction to take place. When the 2 hours finish, remove the ribs and place them meat side down onto 2 sheets of heavy-duty aluminum foil. Then you're going to drop a tablespoon of butter over each rib rack. You're going to sprinkle a pinch of brown sugar and drizzle a thin line of honey. Seal the foil tightly so no steam escapes, and this is called the Texas crutch. The foil traps the heat and the moisture, turn the ribs into a self-basting bundle, and it speeds up the tenderness. Keep the smoker at the same 275 degrees Fahrenheit and let the wrapped ribs sit for another 2 hours. After the wrap, open the foil and return the ribs to the grill for the final hour. You're aiming for an internal temperature between 200 and 206 degrees Fahrenheit. At this temperature, the collagen has broken down. So insert a digital probe about halfway into the meat, avoiding the bone, and feel for just a little bit of resistance. When the probe slides in easily, the ribs are tender, but still have a pleasant bite. Another quick check is the toothpick test. Push a toothpick through the meat, and if the toothpick slides through with just a little bit of resistance or just a little bit of a wobble, the meat is done and it will stay juicy when rested. Following the 2-2-1 method gives your ribs that fall off the bone yet still hold together texture on your plate. You cut down the total time from 6 hours to about 5 hours, maybe even 4 hours, depending on how big they are, and you're not sacrificing flavor or texture. The key is watching the internal temperature and using the probe and the toothpick checks instead of trusting a kitchen timer. That approach works on any smoker, pellet grill, or even the oven. As long as you hold the heat steady, now you have a reliable routine that delivers consistent ribs. No more guesswork needed. But here are some added tips. If you lack apple juice, water mixed with a splash of apple cider vinegar works too. Keep each spritz light. You want a sheen, not a puddle on the ribs. Monitor the smoker's ambient temperature with a reliable probe, because drafts could drop it below that 275 degrees that we're looking for, which will prolong your cooking time. After you unwrap the ribs, let the ribs sit uncovered for about 5 to 10 minutes. This will allow the bark to firm up. Resting also allows the juices to redistribute so that your first bite isn't all liquid on the plate. When you slice them, cut between the bones and serve the ribs with a side of coleslaw or pickles, and you'll notice this balance of sweet and sour. Give this 2-2-1 method a try and see how the temperature, not the clock, rules the grill. So now you know a better method to cook ribs rather than using the 3-2-1 method. But here's the thing. You don't have to cook ribs on a smoker to get awesome results. Check out this video right here where I go super in depth on how to cook ribs in an oven. No smoker required. Check it out now. I'll see you there.